Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. No. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Conservative. Constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And one of the most obvious examples of not my backyardism, we see liberals from Lexington go before the Public Service Commission and demand that they do not approve EKPC's attempt to build a solar farm in Fayette County in Lexington. All these liberals say, look, we want solar panels, we need renewables, but just like not here. Okay, why don't you build that over there? In those rural counties with the garbage that votes for Trump. That's what they're saying. They're saying, look, I want this, but I don't want to see it. Put it on somebody else. So we'll dig into that story. We'll dig into what was said and go through some cold, hard numbers and go into just why these solar plants don't make a lot of sense fiscally as well, and why the government's shelling out billions for this. We'll be digging into that. Also, while I have you here, we'll be talking about how another school employee misuses taxpayer funds in the Amendment 2 fight, misusing her taxpayer-funded email and her taxpayer given to her email list that she only has because she works for the schools. This is yet but the latest example in what has now become a laundry list of examples of school employees misusing taxpayer funds on this Amendment 2 fight. And it leads to the question of where is our Attorney General Russell Coleman, paging Russell Coleman. Maybe a strongly worded letter isn't going to do it. This isn't the 70s and you were wronged by a corporate store, so you're writing an angry letter to corporate because that's how you handled customer service back in those days. No, this is the modern times, and right now you people misusing funds. Where are you, buddy? What are you doing? Stop sitting on your hands. We got less than a week to this election, and you're letting people break the laws. So we'll go into that story. We'll have all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So please make sure you head on over to the show wherever you're listening to it at. Go ahead and open up that app and leave a review for the show. Make sure you're following the show as well. You've subscribed to it. Make sure you've signed up for notifications of the show so that way you'll be alerted every time we post a new episode. We're doing about 3 a week right now. And so, you want to make sure you get them when they come out. So we'll have, you'll be able to stay up to date, especially too, as we go into our next episode. We'll be covering some of the local level races here in Kentucky, handicapping them a bit, trying to figure out who's going to win where are they in trouble and where they're not. So we're going to have that on the next show. But without further ado, let's dig down into it. So for reference today, I'm going to be leaning on Austin Horn's article out of the Herald Leader titled, Mayor Gorton, that's the mayor of Lexington for those who don't know, adds opposition to Fayett's solar proposal, but others ask, why not? Why not? Interesting article detailing how the Public Service Commission that really oversees the utilities. So any of anything utilities want to do, right? So essentially, for those of you who are unaware, the utility companies own the lines, right? They own the power lines and everything else, and the government okayed them building the lines. But one of the problems you run into when it comes to these power lines is there's only one set of lines, so therefore there's only one company that owns the lines, only one company that can deliver the power. And so you have essentially a government enforced monopoly, or I guess you could have a lot more power lines running all over the place, or government themselves way back when could have built the power lines themselves, but they gave it to a private company to do, which is probably the right choice to just let a power company build the utilities, but, figuring out a way to allow competition would be great. But they don't have that yet. So because you only have really one choice of power provider, the Public Service Commission acts as a defense, is supposed to be a defense of the consumer, looking out for the consumer, basically negotiating with the power companies on our behalf. And it's a commission appointed by the governor and has to approve any power changes. In this case, they want to build a project near the Clark County line, and they want to take 2 parcels of land that's between I-64 and US 60, and they want to produce and build a solar farm there that would be able to power 4,558 homes. They want 40 megawatts of power, they say. We want to make 40 megawatts of power there. So I wanted to grab some excerpts from this article. First, we go to this. Gorton characterizes the plan from Eastern Kentucky Power Cooperative as a new threat to Fayette County's irreplaceable farmland. In a statement delivered to the Kentucky Public Service Commission Tuesday at the formal hearing held by the body, which regulates power providers across the state, Gordon touted Lexington's careful planning over the decades. The urban service boundary, its oldest such boundary in the United States, and the city's agricultural conservation easement purchasing program, which has been ongoing for 20 plus years. She characterized solar farms like the one proposed by EKPC as undermine the city's preservation goals and the horse industry, a key driver of tourism to the area. Now, before we go into too much about the solar panels and everything else, I want to make something really clear, okay? When it comes to this actual fight going on between Gorton and other liberals in Fayette County and then the power company to build solar panels, I don't really have, quote unquote, a dog in the fight. Sure, I live in Fayette County. Those of you who listen to the show know that. But, you know, anybody listening to the show knows that this obsession with preserving the quote unquote agricultural land in Fayette County is running into a head and running into a problem. And she kind of hits upon it here with the urban service boundary. I'm going to dig into that in a second, but I want to talk about just solar in general. I'm not a proponent of necessarily solar. I'm not an enemy of solar either, per se. What I'm against, and we'll go into the numbers here in a bit, is the government taking our funds and trying to fund this green energy initiative that makes no sense at all. The technology isn't there. The cost doesn't make sense. And if it was natural, see, this is the thing, and we'll dig down into it. But if it was really cheaper, to build these solar farms, maintain them, and put out power, then it wouldn't need to be incentivized by the government. And we're going to go into how the government's spending billions on this, but just the very fact that government needs to should tell us something. Because if you could somehow build a less maintenance, cleaner, but less maintenance, easier operating system that produces enough power, they would switch to it in a heartbeat. So rather than spending the billions trying to incentivize these kinds of projects, maybe you should be spending billions if you really are committed to it and you insist upon spending taxpayer funds, advancing the technology. But of course they can't, because maybe the technology just isn't there. And like I said, you should just let these private companies do it. There's huge incentives for these power companies to make solar farms work even without government intervention. Because if you can get a solar farm that takes like next to no maintenance, far less people than it takes to run something like a coal-powered plant, and it's cheaper than in the long run, you wouldn't need to give them anything. You wouldn't need to incentivize anything. You wouldn't need to work with it. But of course, not the case. The government's really pushing this. Like I said, we'll go into that in a second. But I want to make it clear that I'm not doing a not in my backyardisms here, because I personally don't particularly like the idea of most of these solar projects anyways. They make no sense in Kentucky, really. We don't get enough sunlight. But anyways, going into, though, what Gorton brought up. She's talking about the urban service boundary. Now, those of you unaware, Fayette County is a urban county government, and the urban service boundary, if you want to basically build developments and things like that, you have to expand the urban service boundary in order to build something like a development or something else. Now, something else that the city of Lexington has been doing, and in turn the county, because the city and county are the same thing, they've been buying up the property development rights on what they call agricultural land. And I really want to challenge the idea here. Like, as in the city of Lexington owns something like 50,000 acres of property development rights in Fayette County. And they spend like 10 to 12 million on this a year, and they say they're doing it to maintain this agricultural land. But we're really running into a big problem when it comes to what Lexington's trying to do. They want to build up, not out, of course. But the problem is that as you are building up and as land and everything else becomes more valuable in Fayette County, as desirability for actually owning a home as well becomes more desirable in Fayette County, the cost and the value of this farmland will inevitably go up. And how do you pay your property taxes? Because this is a real problem that these farms and agricultural land are running into. Now, understand, when they're talking about farms and ag land, Fayette County doesn't have, like, food production, okay? I mean, it's got a little bit, but not much. When you look at the USDA, they break it down and they say, look, out of the, I believe it's what, $333 million a year in agricultural business done in Fayette County, out of Fayette County. It's a pretty penny, but about 75% of it directly comes from horses. Like, next to nothing comes from things like eggs, poultry, harvesting food, there's a little bit of cattle in there. There is some cattle. There's like 6-7 million a year in cattle being done in Fayette County. Now, I don't know how much that has to do with the stockyard that is in Fayette County boundaries, or how much of it has to do with some of these horse farms. I'm aware will have some cows hidden away on the farms in some places in order to make some more money. But the problem is that these parcels of land in Fayette County are incredibly valuable, but they're not liquid, and so you end up paying these taxes. You have no way to pay them, and it's funny. There's a show on Netflix called, I believe it's called The Gentleman, and it was based upon a movie. And then, of course, we have the real life bluegrass conspiracy that happened, in the 70s and 80s here in Fayette County, where the Blue Bloods, that's what they're called, but the owners of these horse farms, the historical family owners of these horse farms, they couldn't afford even selling these horses for millions of dollars and everything else. They really couldn't afford the taxes and upkeep on the land. I happen to be familiar with some of these farms' budgets, and I'm talking $50 to $100 million a year just for upkeep on these farms, just to pay for people to keep up with everything, keep everything looking nice, keep up with the barns, and take care of the horses. And then on top of that, you have the training and everything. Like, these are expensive pieces of property. And the taxes, too. The taxes. But, so they couldn't afford that anymore. And so what ended up happening is some of these socialites within Fayette County started allowing their farms to be used for drug smuggling operations in order to make money. And there's a Netflix show called The Gentleman that's based over in England, where it talks kind of about the same problem, where you have the lords and ladies in England that have thousands of acres of land and these giant houses that have been passed down to them over the generations, but they have no money to take care of the place. And so they start letting drug growers grow, in this case it's marijuana, on their land, in order to go ahead and pay for the upkeep on their properties. And so this is a real problem. And so I've said this many times over, that for Fayette County, and we see this in Louisville, we see this in a lot of counties, Bardstown, which is Nelson County. We see this in many counties, many cities, where they don't know what they want to be. You know, we have Linda Gordon sitting here saying that she's concerned about, and you hear this, like I said, in towns all across Kentucky, where they're simultaneously trying to grow their city, their county, and solve things like housing problems, while at the same time trying to maintain the rural appeal, the scenic appeal of their county. And you can't have it both ways. You cannot simultaneously grow your county without also allowing your county to grow out, because what ends up happening is that the lands around the area goes up so high in value, you're pricing historical owners out of it, and it cannot be maintained. It can't be maintained. So what are you going to do? That becomes the question. And so with that in mind, Linda Gordon up here talking about how, well, this urban service boundary, we're really careful about our growth and everything else. It's just real rich coming from the people that demand all this, the housing problems we fix. We want growth. We want all these things. But at the same time, hey, we don't want to provide any of the tools to make it happen. What's funny is if I was a betting man, I'd say Linda Gordon's a Kamala Harris voter. But Kamala Harris has actually stated that she wants to get involved in these city disputes in order to solve the housing problem, because it's recognized that local regulation is really what's creating our housing issues. So that's, of course, she's not going to really solve it, because all the housing issues are being created by the liberal leadership within these cities, and they're just going to say, look, just leave us alone, and she'll back off, which is why you shouldn't vote for Kamala Harris. Anyways, but Linda Gordon goes on. So she goes on to give us the real... She literally basically comes out and says, not in my backyard. Actually, two people say this here, but let's go ahead and see what she has to say. Our government supports solar, Gordon said. We think solar projects are possible here without forcing us to give up irreplaceable farmland, a key component of our signature industry. Gordon and a handful of other Lexington officials and activists also questioned the benefit of the project to Fayette County. Though the PSC is a statewide regulatory body, they mentioned that no permanent jobs would come into Fayette County as a result of the project, and only about 7,000 Fayette Countyans would be served by the project. So it's interesting that they're now worried about jobs being brought into an area because, of course, as we're talking about permanent jobs and they talk about jobs created, it seems like every other economic creating and driving force, they don't seem to talk about it. But suddenly now they're saying the quiet part out loud as they're trying to argue against this job. But what they're alluding to, or what Gordon and others are alluding to, and some said it online too, and I made a post about this, is why don't we just put the panels on the buildings? Why don't we just go ahead and build them there? Why don't we just go ahead and build them above parking garages and everything else? Why do they need to be here on this farmland? And it goes into a few things here. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert, and here in a bit we're going to go through some math. So I'm not going to pretend to be a super duper expert on any of this. And if somebody is that's listening to the show, please reach out to the show. Let us know. You can email us at info@theandrewshow.com if I get anything wrong here. But let's talk about putting panels on buildings. So your first issue with panels on buildings is you do need to be able to get to the panels. The panels do need cleaned occasionally, once or twice a year. According to the research I've done, it looks like they need to be changed. And other parts need to be maintained, of course, the rotating and other things. And so when they're on top of buildings, that can get expensive, hard to reach. Having to climb on top of a building to maintain 4 or 5 panels, compared to if you just had hundreds of panels in a field and you can just pretty much walk up to them and take care of them. Also, you need to run lines to get them to the power generation place where they... and you can't run those lines from building to building. It's not like the top of, the Lexington skyline will be line ran between all of them to lead then to the station where the power is being routed. No, so because when it's all on the ground, you can either run the lines underground between them or even run the lines directly between them without having to stretch them across high rises and parking garages and take up streets and take up sidewalks and everything else and put the lines down. So the expense to build them is already high, but it gets really increased by this kind of production side of things, this kind of building of solar panels on these buildings like this, because you got to hide the lines somewhere. What are you going to do? And so anyway, so that becomes part of the problem because you have to monitor the power coming into it as well. And obviously, if there was a way to economically produce solar energy by just putting panels on top of a building, I think they would have done it by now. But it's not as economical as just putting them on the ground in farmland. Now, that is giving the most generous read to Gorton's here statement, where she said here. What she could be also saying is by here she means in Kentucky as a general. And if she's saying we think solar's possible without having to force Fayette County to give up irreplaceable farmland, what she's saying then is that basically, look, Fayette County's farmland is way more important than any other county's farmland. So why don't you just go ahead and take your solar project, take it on down the road, take it to those garbage voters out there in, Mercer County, for an example, Anderson County, for an example. Take your projects there, build them there. We're not interested in that happening here. That would be the least charitable read, which is truthfully the quintessential not in my backyard, and shamelessly saying so too as well. Now we continue into the article because let's get into the cost here. So EKPC is coming fresh off a round of positive news for its renewable energy future. A federal investment of $1.4 billion was announced earlier this week through the Empowering Rural America program, a product of 2022's Inflation Reduction Act that will be used to help the utility build 757 megawatts of solar generation and improve its power transmission. To help build. So that doesn't even completely cover the cost. So $1.4 billion being spent on 757 megawatts of solar generation. Now, this is where we're going to get into some maths here because I do want to put this in perspective so you understand why the government has to shell this out. And I'm doing the best I can with the information I have. I'm not going to pretend I'm a podcaster, right? I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on power production. Obviously, I've learned a lot studying through legislation and trying to understand it. So if I get something wrong, feel free, like I said, to reach out to the show. But I do want to dig through these numbers. So it doesn't say, when they're talking about getting $1.4 billion to build 757 megawatts of solar generation, it doesn't say that that's megawatt hours, but I'm going to assume that's what it means. Because when you're talking about power plants, like if you're talking about a 500 megawatt hour power plant, what you're talking about is a power plant that has the ability to generate 500 megawatts an hour per hour. And of course, in a coal power plant at least, there's a few thousand, certainly, hours a year. And so you take that number and you multiply it by the number of hours a year. And that's how power production, if you want to see their yearly production. So when they say 757 megawatts, I believe what they're saying is 757 megawatt hours power production, because that's kind of how it's measured. So that would be 6,631,320 megawatts per hour per year. Okay. Now, 6,631,320 megawatts is equivalent to 6,631,320,000 kilowatts. Now, according to the EIA.gov energy conversion calculator, that means that it is 22,626,163,840,000 BTUs. And there's 18,820,000 BTUs in 1 short ton of coal. Or that would mean in order to create that much energy in coal, because that's what we're comparing this to. We're trying to compare how does this solar generation compare to coal generation. So to make 757 megawatt solar generation, if we're looking at a system like that, I'm assuming they're talking about kilowatt hours. So that's what led us to that 6,631,000 megawatts. So to produce that amount of energy per year, you would need about 1.2 million short tons, or another way to say that is 649 metric tons of coal a year. Now, last year, Eastern Kentucky coal spot price sold for about $73.59 per metric ton. So that's a $1.4 billion investment they're making. that produces the same amount of energy per year as $80.3 million a year worth in coal. Even if there's no upkeep on the panels themselves. And keep in mind, coal power plants, they're already built, and they do take more manpower to upkeep and run as well. I do get that, but let's just get rid of upkeep completely. It would take just over 17 years. We're getting rid of it on both sides. It would take just over 17 years for the solar farm to produce the same amount of energy as it costs as coal would, as the same cost as coal. That's the break-even point, if there's no upkeep at all. And so now you know why coal is the second cheapest energy production next to hydro. That's why that's why coal production states have lower costs than renewable states. The sheer cheapness of coal compared to the power production. And this is before we get into a few other things. That's why government has to enforce regulations on coal. They need to make it more expensive to make a profit incentive to switch to solar. And that's before we get into the fact that these solar panels need to be replaced just about every 25 years or so. So if we take all maintenance, property tax, and I say property tax because the price per acre in Lexington's pretty high. It's $40,000 an acre on average. But keep in mind, when you're building solar panels, you need open area. You need flat land with no trees. But those are also good building sites and good farming sites. So that is a more valuable chunk of land compared to coal power plants have a lot more flexibility on where you can put them. So when you're building these solar plants, these solar fields, you're buying more expensive land than you would to build a coal plant. That comes with an increased cost and things like property taxes that do cost more. I mean, for Lexington, the price per acre is $40,000 on average. And then if you go out to like Eastern Kentucky, you can buy land, even flat land areas, for $5,000 to $7,000 an acre all day if you're buying it in sizable chunks. So anyways, we're going to take all that out. It's still 17 years. And then it needs to be replaced in 25 years. So you're like, well, you're still getting 8 years, and it does have less running costs. Well, there's something wrong in what I just talked about. So we just talked about 17 years most gracious production, but that's assuming the 757 megawatt solar farm produces all day long. That's what that calculation was based on. Because that is something I'm not clear on when we look at these solar farms. Not that I'm not clear on when solar farms, I know they don't produce all day long, but when they're trying to measure the production of a solar farm, are they taking into account the fact that sun does not shine all day long? Because when they're talking about a 757 megawatt coal plant, they're saying that coal plant can produce up to 757 megawatts. What that means is if it's operating at 100%, well, because it's coal and coal is stored as coal, then you put more coal. If you're bringing on a turbine, you just put coal into, that, I guess it's a boiler or whatever, to heat the water to create the steam. So you just put the coal in there to get those turbines going. When you throw that in there, it's already stored. That's energy storage. You can bring it up 24/7, but when it's solar, well, it only produces when the sun is shining. And if I'm a betting man, I bet the 757 megawatts of solar generation would be, if it's sun shining, they're getting 100% production. So during the night, they ain't getting nothing off that. That means now you have to store the energy. And don't get me started on that. Actually, you know what? You got me started. We're going through it. Because that's another huge factor for cost. Because the cost to store energy is extremely high if you're trying to store it as electricity. According to howtostoreelectricity.com, went right to the source on that one, it costs about $300 per kilowatt hour in a battery to store energy. So let's say you need to store, I don't know, in a day it can produce 9,084 megawatts if the sun was shining 12 hours a day and it was collecting at 100%. And so if we want to store half of that for night usage, That's 4,542 megawatts, which is equivalent to 4.5 million kilowatts. At a cost of $300 per kilowatt, that's another $1.3 billion just to store the energy. But we know this. We know coal is less expensive and better on-demand energy. That's why states that have coal-fired plants and use coal for energy production have lower costs than states that don't. Simply put, coal-powered states don't have to buy their energy elsewhere. Because when you are on these naturals, when you're on wind and solar, when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, you still need to get your power somewhere. And you literally can't afford to store it. So they end up having to buy power off the market from other states. And buying that power from other states means that the producer of it, instead of it being the power company, well, somebody else has to produce it. And then you have to buy it from them. And that drives the energy costs up because there's now more people making money, more companies making money, and the energy exchange rates gets more and more expensive. That's why government has to give out billions of dollars. If it was actually a valuable and a proposition that made sense as a power company, they wouldn't need to do it. They wouldn't need to do it, but they have to give them literally billions. And at the same time, heavily regulate coal to try to crank up the cost of coal-fired plants and power, because they know that if it was just coal left to regulation standards even of 5 to 10 years ago, solar, even giving them a free $1.4 billion to build it, still wouldn't be a value add, would not be a good business decision for these power companies. But I'm not done here, because we now have Representative Kamul, who comes on board to say that, to really wrap up this argument of not in my backyard. She said that solar energy was absolutely necessary, but agricultural land in Fayette County is not the place for it. You know, you can put it elsewhere, just not here. The proposal is located on a Kentucky scenic byway, US 60, which is vital for tourism and designated by the state to have both economic and cultural importance. My family and I often take the scenic byway out of Lexington when we go home to Moorhead because of the peace and beauty it provides as you drive along the rolling ribbon of road. The people of Fayette County value their farmland for agriculture, and our local land use policies make that clear. This location for solar is not appropriate. Well, compared to other counties that don't value their farmland, come on. Where are you going to build it? Hear them saying a whole lot of, don't build it here, but where's their solution? Like, go throw that on the poor, white, rural counties, middle of nowhere that for some reason have tons of flat land, because keep in mind, you can't build in eastern Kentucky. Too many trees, mountains. There's songs about how, about it, in fact. You'll Never Leave Harlan Alive, fun song, interestingly, about coal. Well, it's kind of about coal mining there at the end, a guy dying in a coal mine. But there's in the hook, in the chorus, there's a line about how basically the sun doesn't rise till 10, and then it sets at 3. So in the holler, it's only sunny like 5 hours out of the day. So they can't build it in eastern Kentucky. They have to go elsewhere. But not in Fayette County. Keep moving. You know, to steal Stony Hinchcliffe's joke, you know. We welcome solar with open arms. And by open arms, they mean arms that are openly waving away the solar projects. Go away from us, not here. No. Anyway, so moving on from my rant about not in your backyardism coming out of the Fayette County Liberals. Corey DeAngelis has this post on X here. It says, breaking, a Kentucky's teachers union president used her official district account to send an email to all employees telling them, we must talk to our friends and neighbors about the importance of voting no on Amendment 2. So this is from one Rebecca Seelock out of Marshall County Schools. She said she used her official email, so this is coming from her marshall.kyschools.us email account, with a subject line of impact on property taxes, Amendment 2, and she sent it to all Marshall County employees at marshall.kyschools.us. So not only did she use her official email address, but she then used everyone else's official email address to send the following message. As many of you know, other states have passed laws similar to Kentucky's proposed Amendment 2. If Amendment 2 passes, it will allow our General Assembly to use tax dollars to fund private schools in states where this has already been enacted, Florida, Kansas, etc. Local districts have led to compensate for the shortfall in state funding with increased local taxes. The Kentucky Council for Better Education has created a spreadsheet to inform everyone of the possible negative impacts on public education if Amendment 2 passes. Attached is the spreadsheet in which they have used the potential loss reported by Kentucky Center for Economic Policy and local real estate and personal property tax assessment to quantify the required local property tax rate increases to give a new required tax rate and the related percentage change to the fund potential loss and revenue from the implementation of Amendment 2 vouchers Florida model as projected by KCEP report. Now, first, she's already lying, by the way, because there's a lot of supposed. I mean, she's cooking up a situation because first, you have to pass a vouchers model. You have to pass a vouchers model equivalent to Florida's. You then have to assume that you keep funding at the same level. Because this is the thing, right? Remember, with Amendment 2, if students leave, because what they're concerned about is the state saying, oh, okay, well, we're paying out $4,400 a student, so we're paying that per student. If a student leaves a school, that $4,400 can follow them. And the schools are saying, well, you know, that cuts our funding, $4,400 per student that leaves. We can't afford that. But keep in mind that schools don't spend $4,400 a student. They spend like $20,000 a student. And so that other $16,000 per student didn't leave with the student. They still are making that $16,000. And now they have one less kid to educate. So if anything, their actual spending and funding per student will go up drastically. The only thing is students will leave. And if a student leaves, well, they don't have control over them anymore. And if a student leaves, that means they don't have as many jobs at that school. Keep in mind, the teaching jobs still remain. They just go elsewhere. A little competition in the marketplace. But all the administrators used and all the other non-essential, non-teaching jobs, you know, they probably will be lost. Because that's why these quote-unquote private schools are able to educate kids for far less because they don't have those same expenses. And so these, what they're really worried about is that these teachers will, one, leave the unions. Unions have less power. Unions have less money. And then the administrators are worried because, well, less teachers means less administrators. The teachers still have their jobs elsewhere, but just not that same amount of administrators. Less students, less administrators. They don't like that. They don't like that at all. So anyways, we continue here. As you can see from the spreadsheet, property taxes would have to increase in Marshall County by over 55%, they claim, to compensate from diverting state tax dollars to private school vouchers. We are in the home stretch of the election. We must talk to our friends and neighbors about the importance of voting no on Amendment 2. So she didn't just send out information. She can't even claim that. She literally called out saying vote no on Amendment 2. Now, this is clearly illegal. Russell Coleman has made several statements and has made several rulings on this already when asked for opinions that you cannot do this. You cannot use state-funded resources, taxpayer-funded resources, to advocate against a ballot initiative. You cannot use your school email and everyone else's school emails to send out something advocating and politicize, and not just politicizing, but campaigning on behalf of someone or something. This is plainly true. We saw Pulaski County getting in trouble over Facebook. She's the union president. She knew. We know she knows she shouldn't be doing this. But she did it anyways. Why? Because Russell Coleman ain't going to do anything. And she knows it. What's he going to do? Oh, no, don't do that. We saw last time that a school did something like this. They sent a cease and desist. They sent out a cease and desist to him, a strongly worded letter. You know, like a person complaining to a department store in the 70s. You know, they don't go online anymore. Back then, there was no online. They wrote I'm going to write a strongly worded letter. We'll see how they like that. It's like, is that what's going on over there? Get off your butt, Russell Coleman. It's almost less than a week till Election Day. They are flagrantly violating the law. They are flagrantly not following your already issued rulings on these subjects. You have already said this is illegal, and they don't care. They think you're weak, Russell Coleman. They don't think you're able to do anything. So why don't you prove them wrong? Why don't you get off your butt and do something for once about something that's actually going on in this state? I understand you've been doing a lot of court actions that have been making the headlines, fighting that Joe Biden administration, and we appreciate you for that. We do. But we're talking about a state-specific issue. This is what you're here for. To be a check on state actors getting out of line. You have a state actor getting out of line. What are you going to do about it? Oh, no. I guess I'll send him another strongly worded letter. Why don't you prosecute some people? It's violating the law. What are you going to do? How are you going to remedy this before Tuesday? The inaction on this is absolutely crazy. How do you send a message to never do this again? Because remember that we're not talking about just these kinds of ballot initiatives. There's referendums on taxes and those kinds of things that comes out of the school district that if you don't stand up and tell these school districts to stop doing this, these school employees, stop doing this, you will be prosecuted. You will lose your job. You are stealing from the taxpayer. Every time there's a tax referendum coming out of one of the county school boards, they're just going to use their millions of taxpayer funds to advocate for it. Why wouldn't they? What are you going to do about it? As long as Russell Coleman's in office, we know we're in the clear. He ain't going to do nothing. He's just going to complain. He might write a letter. Oh, no. Russell Coleman wrote another letter. Oh, boy. And you could say I'm being unfair to Russell Coleman. You could say I'm unfairly calling him out. But I've now seen him, write 3-4 letters or cease and desist, posts, press conferences, talking about how this is illegal and they shouldn't do it, and yet they don't care. They don't care. It upsets me when people steal from the taxpayer. Apparently it doesn't upset Russell Coleman. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Hope you have a great rest of your day.